Ferrari just exposed something that could shake Formula One to its core. Not rumors, not suspicions. Actual proof of how Mercedes may be gaining up to 40 extra horsepower while still passing every single FIA test as completely legal. This isn't just an advantage. This is a hidden system that could decide races before they even begin. Because if Ferrari is right, then Mercedes isn't just faster. They're operating outside the spirit of the rules without ever breaking them. And here's the part that makes this explosive. The FIA already checked the engine multiple times and still declared it legal. So how do you stop something that dominates the sport but technically shouldn't be illegal? Ferrari says they have the answer. And if they're right, then everything we've seen this season was never a fair fight. Subscribe now, because what Ferrari revealed changes everything. Ferrari didn't reveal everything at once. That's what makes this even more serious. Because this wasn't an emotional reaction. It was calculated, measured, built step by step until the full picture became impossible to ignore. And it all started with something very small, a detail most people would completely miss. When Ferrari engineers first analyzed the Mercedes engine data, nothing looked illegal. That's important, because if something is obviously illegal, it gets caught immediately. But this wasn't obvious. It was subtle, too subtle, the kind of detail that only stands out if you already suspect something deeper. And what they noticed was precision, extreme precision. The internal dimensions of the engine were tighter than expected, not by chance, not by manufacturing excellence alone, but by design. Because in Formula One, tolerances like that are never random. They are intentional. They are engineered for a purpose. But at that moment, Ferrari didn't know what that purpose was. They only knew one thing. This engine was built to behave differently. And that realization changed everything. Because instead of asking how powerful the engine was, they started asking when it becomes powerful. That shift is where the entire story begins. Because the FIA wasn't measuring performance during a race. They were measuring it in a controlled environment. Cold, static, disconnected from real conditions. And under those conditions, Mercedes was perfect. 16-to-1 compression. Exactly the regulatory limit. No advantage. No issue. Completely legal. But Ferrari understood something the regulations didn't fully account for. Engines are not static. They change. They evolve under temperature. And when temperatures rise, materials expand. Internal volumes shift. And that changes the way the engine behaves. Now here's where it gets critical. Because if you design an engine knowing exactly how those materials will expand, you can control what happens when the engine gets hot. You can predict it. You can engineer it. And that's exactly what Ferrari believes Mercedes did. At low temperatures, everything aligns with the rules. Perfectly. But at race conditions, when the engine reaches extreme heat, the internal geometry changes just enough to increase compression. Not dramatically, not in a way that triggers alarms, but enough. Enough to create a real advantage. Enough to generate more power. Enough to win. And suddenly, something that looks legal in the garage behaves very differently on track. That's the gap Ferrari is exposing. The difference between measurement and reality. And once you understand that gap, everything starts to make sense. The consistent pace, the acceleration advantage, the way Mercedes pulls away in moments where differences should be minimal. This isn't random performance. It's controlled performance. But here's where the tension really begins. Because Ferrari didn't just identify the problem. They quantified it. They calculated the potential gain. And what they found is what shocked the entire paddock. We're not talking about a tiny edge. We're talking about up to 40 extra horsepower under real conditions. That's massive. That's the kind of gain that transforms a competitive car into a dominant one. And that's when Ferrari made a decision. They didn't stay silent. They took it further. Because once you reach that level of understanding, you have two choices. Ignore it or expose it. And Ferrari chose to expose it. But they didn't do it alone. Because when Honda and Audi looked at the same data, they saw the same thing, the same pattern, the same risk. And suddenly, this wasn't just Ferrari versus Mercedes. This was multiple manufacturers against a single interpretation of the rules. And that's when the situation escalated. Because now, it wasn't just a technical debate. It was a political one, a regulatory one, a fight over how Formula One defines fairness itself. And right in the middle of it, Mercedes stood firm, calm, unshaken, because they knew something very important. They hadn't broken the rules. Not technically. And that's what makes this so difficult to resolve. Because if you punish them, you punish innovation. But if you don't, You allow an advantage that others didn't see coming. And that's the balance the FIA is now struggling to maintain. But here's the part that changes everything. Ferrari isn't done, because what they revealed so far is only the foundation. And what comes next is what could truly put Mercedes in trouble. But this is where the story stops being just a technical explanation and becomes a real problem for Mercedes. Because Ferrari didn't just explain how the system works. They started connecting it to what's actually happening on track. And that's when everything became much harder to defend. Because once you understand the mechanism, you start seeing the evidence everywhere. Race after race, lap after lap, the pattern is always the same. Mercedes doesn't just start fast, they become faster. As the race progresses, as temperatures rise, as the engine reaches its true operating window, that's when the gap appears. Not immediately, not in the first laps, but later, when conditions are exactly where this system is designed to work. And that detail is critical, because it matches perfectly with Ferrari's claim. An engine that behaves one way when cold, and another when it's fully pushed. And now, Ferrari is pointing at something even more dangerous. Consistency. Because this isn't happening once. It's happening every race. Australia, China, Japan. The same pattern, the same evolution, the same result. Mercedes pulling away with a level of control that doesn't match normal development gains. And in Formula One, consistency is everything. Because one strong performance can be explained, two can be questioned, but repeated dominance, that demands an answer. And this is where the pressure starts to build inside the FIA. Because Ferrari isn't just presenting a theory anymore. They're presenting a pattern, a repeatable advantage that aligns with a very specific technical explanation. And that combination is dangerous, because it forces a decision. You can ignore speculation, you can dismiss isolated data, but you can't ignore a pattern that keeps proving itself. And this is exactly why the FIA had to act. Not with a penalty, not with a disqualification, but with something more subtle. A change in how reality is measured. Because that's the core of the problem. Not the engine itself, but how it's being evaluated. So the FIA made a decision that, without saying it directly, confirms everything Ferrari has been arguing. They changed the test, from cold-only measurements to real operating conditions, around 130 degrees. The same environment where Ferrari believes the advantage exists. And that single decision says more than any statement ever could. Because if nothing was wrong, there would be nothing to change. But here's where things become even more tense. Because this new rule doesn't apply immediately. It comes later, which means Mercedes keeps their current engine for several more races. Still legal, still compliant, still dominant. And that creates a situation nobody is comfortable with. Because now every result before that change carries a question. Not officially, but competitively. Was it fair? Was it equal? Or was one team operating with something others didn't have? And Ferrari knows this, which is why they haven't stopped pushing. Because from their perspective, every race before that rule change is a lost opportunity. A lost chance to fight on equal terms. And that frustration is growing. Race by race, lap by lap. But here's the most important part. Even when the rule changes, that doesn't guarantee everything resets. Because Mercedes has had time. Time to prepare. Time to adapt. Time to redesign. And in Formula One, time is everything, which leads to the question nobody can answer yet. What happens when the advantage is taken away? Does Mercedes fall back? Or do they stay ahead anyway? Because if they stay ahead, then this wasn't the real secret. It was just one layer. And that possibility is what makes this situation so unsettling. Because Ferrari may have revealed everything about this trick and still not be seeing the full picture. And if that's true, then Mercedes isn't in trouble yet. They're just getting started. And this is where everything reaches its breaking point. Because up to now, Mercedes has had the perfect defense. They followed the rules. They passed every inspection. They built something clever, but legal. And in Formula One, that's usually enough. But Ferrari just changed the battlefield. Because this is no longer just about legality. It's about pressure. Relentless pressure. From engineers. From rival teams. From the FIA itself. Because once something like this is exposed, it doesn't go away. It grows. Every race becomes evidence. Every lap becomes analysis. Every onboard, every data trace, every thermal reading. All of it is now being watched with one question in mind. Where is the advantage coming from? And that kind of attention is something no team wants. Not even Mercedes. Because Formula One history is very clear about one thing. The moment everyone starts looking at you, you lose your invisibility. And once you lose that, everything becomes harder. Development becomes harder. Scrutiny becomes constant. Every update gets questioned. Every gain gets analyzed. And suddenly, what used to be an advantage becomes a target. And this is exactly where Mercedes finds itself now. Right in the center of attention. Not just as the fastest team, but as the team everyone is trying to decode. But here's where the situation becomes even more intense. Because Ferrari didn't just expose the present. They may have exposed the past. And that changes everything. Because if this system has been there since the beginning of the season, then every result starts to look different. Those early wins, that early dominance, that gap that seemed almost too clean to question. Now it has context. Now it has an explanation. And even if everything was technically legal, the perception changes. And perception in Formula One is powerful. Because it affects decisions. It affects pressure. It affects how the FIA reacts moving forward. And right now, the FIA is in the most difficult position possible. Because they have two options. Act aggressively and risk a legal battle with Mercedes. Or move carefully and risk losing control of the competitive balance. Neither option is safe. And Mercedes knows it. That's why their response has been so controlled, so precise.